So it's the Memorial Day weekend here in the US. And even though the weather's been bad, I've actually had a surprisingly good Memorial Day weekend. Work has been on the fringes, but I've recorded podcasts, I've worked on Noble Ape extensively, and I just thought it's worthwhile actually cataloguing the good experiences as they occur occasionally as well. I'm starting to feel that this podcast, unfortunately, has been too often drawn in to some turmoil or some nonsense that I have to deal with. Maybe as an account, what have you. I want to put that aside and describe a few circumstances. My wife wanted hot dogs. We went on a relatively long bike ride. We came back and my wife said, I'd like to get some hot dogs, because it's Memorial Day and apparently that's an important thing. And although we had some frozen Hebrew National in the refrigerator, we decided to go to Costco and buy a Windows laptop. Now, my wife has a need for a Windows laptop, and mysteriously, I have a need too. I mean, I work on Noble Ape periodically. I have a purchased for $200 laptop, which my wife says comes from the mid-90s, because it comes from the mid-90s. It does have a DVD drive, but that's an aside. So we went to Costco in order to get the Windows laptop and get some hot dogs. This one does. Brought the Windows laptop home, did a bunch of playing with it to try and just get... So I used this thing called Git, which is the way that I move the source code of Noble Ape around and the other related projects. So I spent a good portion of Saturday getting Git working with Noble Ape, getting the Windows build working, doing a bunch of changes with the Windows build to make it more generic so I could run Noble Warfare and the Mushroom Boy on the Windows build. And basically for the past 2 days, well, day and a half, that's what I've been working on. I've been able to get Noble Warfare up to a point, but there are other things that are blocking it. So now I'm concentrating on rewriting the Mushroom Boy so it will be cross-platform. It will run on Mac and Windows. And in doing this, I'm also recording podcasts, putting out podcasts. I had a wonderful chat with Jeffrey Ventrella and Brian Dodd. I hadn't spoken to Brian previously. It's really interesting recording these Biota podcasts now because basically I'm getting back in contact with people I haven't heard from for years and just seeing where their work is. I mean, Jeffrey, when I last spoke with him, was starting this new venture, Wiggle Planet. I talked to him and Brian a little bit about that in the Biota podcast. But yeah, it's just nice to get back in contact with these folk and provide the recordings out for an audience and try to regain that audience in some very meaningful sense, because people have kind of wandered away from the podcast, as you do over a kind of 7-year period. So I have 3 podcasts currently of the same size order. I have this one, Long Funk, I have My Rules Are Better, and I have the Biota podcast. Now, at its peak, the Biota podcast would have had way more listeners, but those listeners are no longer there. So the numbers I'm using are based on Apple's podcasting data and also access to the RSS feed and the actual MP3 files. So it's interesting to see these podcasts pick up steam again. What's particularly interesting is that Long Funk actually has a really interested and dedicated listener base. And this listener base is bigger outside the Apple community than it is within the Apple community. So, you know, most people are listening to this aren't listening to this on Apple's podcasting software, and if you use Apple's podcasting software, you would understand why. But it's interesting to see these audiences. And in parallel to this, Anton, who I started recording the Biota podcast with, uses Twitter heavily. I don't use Twitter a lot, but I've started retweeting certain things to get these ideas out. Not getting a lot of retweets. You know, I'm tweeting stuff, not getting a lot of retweets. I'm getting a lot of likes, which is wonderful, but the retweets actually is what propagates these ideas out in the broader world. So, to be continued. But today, the remaining half of Memorial Day that is ahead of me, I'm going to actually work on the Mushroom Boy and getting the Mushroom Boy ported to Windows. I'm pretty well ahead of the Noble Ape I.O. stuff. The meetings with the lawyers are curious. I'm kind of at a strange impasse with this thing. They don't seem to really understand what Noble Ape is. And the stuff that they're sending me is really very curious. I'm suspecting I'll give them another week. And then, I don't know, probably cut them loose, which means I'll just continue to maintain Noble Ape as I've continued to maintain it. The notion of creating a non-profit around this isn't being presented to me in a fashion which makes sense. And I really think these lawyers are just, you know, they're doing whatever they do, but they're not representing anything that I can do with it. So, to be continued, perhaps, to be just returned to something. Who knows? But probably worth putting out in a Long Funk recording. Just to say, unknown at this stage. Bunch of other little bits and pieces, which aren't really worth editorializing. But I wanted to put it out there that this Memorial Day weekend, at least, I've been heavily involved in rewriting aspects of Snowblade to get it more onto Windows, but also just fixing a bunch of stuff that was just stupid. I had a bunch of stuff all in one file, which needed to be in 3 files. Moving in 3 files, it's a different thing. So, just fixing things up, moving through problems. What one should probably do on Memorial Day.